very interesting meeting. It's nice to be back to the place where I used to work 16 years and left 20 years ago. And because, see, I'm getting old, there will be some historical aspects to this talk, and it was mostly designed for the students. So, experts on carbonatites, please forgive me for simplifying some things a little bit. So, the definition of carbonatite is an igneous rock with more than 50 modal percent of carbonate. And this is a typical example of calcium carbonatite from Brazil, where all this white thing is calcite, and black things are olivine and magnetite mostly. And of course, it's very easy to evaluate the modal proportion of calcite. But the magmatic origin is something that you need to prove, and it has been a matter of controversy whether calcite is magmatic or not. And in early years, so the idea that carbonatite is magmatic was first introduced in 1921 by Brugger, but there was much discussion and much opposition to this idea, because calcite, as you know, at low pressure, at atmospheric pressure, it doesn't melt, it decomposes at about 900 C. And if you add CO2 pressure of about 1 kilobar, it melts, but at very high temperature of more than 1300 C. So it was not compatible with the geological observations of low temperature, late introduction of carbonatites in the magmatic systems. So the breakthrough in carbonatite research happened in early 60s, 1960s. And at that time, it was a coincidence, or maybe not coincidence, that some geological discoveries were combined with experimental breakthrough. And the most important two observations and discoveries came from Eastern Africa, which was at that time still colonial territory of British Empire. And you know, most of these observations were done by British geologists. So one important thing is that Barry Dawson in 1962 published in Nature this discovery of natrocarbonatite lavas, natrocarbonatite eruptions from now famous Aldonio Lengai in northern Tanzania. This is how this volcano and the crater of the volcano looked like 10 years ago, I think, before the last Plinian eruption that emptied the crater now. So this is a phenolitic nephelenitic volcano, strongly peralkaline. Everything is silicate rocks, except here in the crater you see this white material, which is natrocarbonatite. It's roughly 50% sodium carbonate, calcium carbonate, and because there is so much sodium, it doesn't decompose. The temperature of these eruptions is about 560 C. The lava flows are originally black, but they immediately start to absorb moisture from the atmosphere and they become white. Another very important discovery was a discovery of dolomitic, very different types of carbonatites. Not calcium carbonatites, but dolomitic carbonatites on one hand, with chromium spinel, which is a very important thing. And later on, it was realized that these things are directly produced by partial melting in the mantle, and natrocarbonatites of Aldonio Lengai. So, as I told you, it was accompanied by experimental breakthrough. And a very important discovery which was done by Peter Weil and Tuttle. And note, this is the first paper that was published in Journal of Petrology, volume 1, part 1, page 1 to 46, which is kind of an interesting thing. They discovered a very simple fact, but very important one, that it's at 1 kilobar, if dry calcite melts at about 1300 C, but if you add water vapor, in the presence of aqueous vapor, the melting point of calcite decreases dramatically down to 800 or something. And that was very important, and that reconciled the idea of magmatic origin of calcium carbonatites with phase equilibrium constraints. And the same Peter Wiley with Koster-Van Gross studied system albite sodium carbonate, I think keeping in mind the recently discovered Aldonian Guy volcano. And they found liquid immiscibility. They found broad area where not one melt but two melts were present, carbonatitic melt and silicate-rich melt. And that was another very important experimental observation that beared upon the origin of Aldonian Guy with this association of phalangritic nephelinitic pile with some natacarbonatitic lava. Probably the best confirmation, the best evidence for silicate carbonate liquid immiscibility has been coming from melt inclusions. This is an example from Roger Mitchell recent study of Aldonian Guy nepheline that contains silicate glass inclusions and globules of immiscible natacarbonatite. It's a very, very vivid confirmation of liquid immiscibility, but I would say that probably the first record of liquid immiscibility silicate carbonate in melt inclusions was done in Lee Kagarka's group. And it has been known since 1970 something. So, in view of these three different types of carbonatites and in view of these discoveries that started in the 1960s, there are still three models, three different classes of model. So, carbonatites may originate by low degrees of partial melting of carbonate-bearing mantle salts. This is primary origin, and you would expect these rocks not to be in association with any silicates. They can be, but they can be just by themselves. And two mechanisms of secondary origin, by silicate carbonate liquid immiscibility of a carbonated nephelinitic or some other silicate magma, and that's kind of instant separation of carbonatite, or by extensive fractional crystallization of silicates from the same or slightly different nephelinitic magma. You crystallize silicates, CO2 accumulates, and finally you end up with residual carbonatites that start to crystallize calcite and dark silicates. And speaking about experimental studies, I should say, for the, especially for the students, that experimenting on carbonate systems is difficult. You need high pressure because they decompose unless they are not carbonatites. And you need high temperature because you are looking at magmatic processes, so it's something like 1000 C and above. And because you need pressure vessels, they need all kinds of special instruments and apparatus that can hold this pressure. And very useful design, one of the first, and they differ. What is the media that pressurizes your sample? That's one distinction. And then whether the heater is outside or inside the pressurized vessel. So these are kind of the two main things how experimental equipment is classified. So this is one of the first designs. It's kind of total pressure tube. It is pressurized by water, but it can be pressurized by gas, by CO2 or argon. This is the electric furnace, so this thing goes inside, and this is the hot end of the, and that's where your sample is. But there is in this design, there is a possibility to rapidly quench this sample because it can be dropped inside this apparatus without C. It can't go any further. To go to high pressures, above 10 kilobars and up to 40 kilobars, People use piston cylinder, which is has been a working horse for experimental petrology for many years, since 1950s. And this is an example from Zurich. Basically, this is the pressure media is here in this cylindrical hole. It's solid. It's solids that are kind of flow under high pressure. The sample is squeezed between two pistons, and the heater is inside the pressurized part. But people went further in experimental design and designed really, clever things. Like here, if you walk on liquid immiscibility and you're planning to produce liquids, you want to separate them, and one of the ways to separate them is by centrifuge, by density. So to promote density, one can use centrifuge, and this is the design that Alex Dorfman, who used to work in this institute as well, but he built this in Germany, in Bayreuth. We use that for studies of silicate and carbonate liquid immiscibility. So this is a centrifuge borrowed from medical technology. It was modified by adding furnaces to that, and instead of 1 atmosphere furnace, one could also use this internally heated pressure vessel, pressurized by argon, with a heater and sample inside. It's a very small version of this type of vessel, and that was designed by Alex Dorfman, and it was very useful for studies of silicate carbonate liquid immiscibility. So what you can do with the centrifuge, you can perfectly separate silicate liquid from the carbonate liquid. Carbonate liquid doesn't quench to glass, it quenches to the fine-grained crystal aggregate. So, and you can just split the sample, and there is almost no cross-contamination, so you can study partitioning of elements that are very contrastingly distributed between these two liquids, and if a little bit of material is cross-contaminated, the partition coefficients will be wrong. Well, people went even further, and with more money in Switzerland, they managed actually, in Zurich, they managed to build this fantastic thing, which is in the basement of the institute. It's a huge thing. It's a steel disc with piston cylinder rotating and allowing to centrifuge things inside the piston cylinder. And that's the second group that produced very good, very reliable data on two-liquid partitioning using centrifuge techniques, but even at high pressure with piston cylinder. Another useful type of experimental equipment is hydrothermal diamond anvil cell. So basically, if you cannot quench system, there is an alternative. You study your liquids and fluids in situ at high pressure and temperature using some transparent material. In this case, it is diamond, which is perfect for pressurizing things. So basically, there are two diamond anvils. There is some volume that can be filled with fluid and liquid, and some crystals may grow there. There is a rhenium gasket that allows you to seal and pressurize this vessel, and everything is put inside of the furnace. Again, the limits are about 900 C. Yeah, you also add argon to protect diamonds from burning. That's how it looks like, and you look at the microscope, or you can do Raman spectroscopy, you can do all kinds of interesting things in a very limited volume. So now let's talk about the main experimental findings. So the first type of carbonatites that I told you directly produced from the mantle. This has been studied, the carbonation reactions in the mantle has been studied by many people for a long time, and just to make things very simple, this is the phase diagram, simplified phase diagram. Basically what it shows is that there is a solidus, there is a beginning of melting of mantle assemblage, and it intersects with this reaction enstatite dolomite. Phosphorite plus diopside plus CO2 gives you enstatite and dolomite. This is the stability field of dolomite below at higher pressures than this line. And when it intersects with the solidus, there is a dramatic drop in solidus temperature of the mantle. So with the normal adiabat in the mantle, you are most likely to start melting things here at the lowest temperature, and the melts that will be produced by very low degrees of partial melting, they will be carbonatitic and they will be kind of dolomitic, because dolomite has much lower melting pressure than silicates. So if you just melt 1% of the mantle here, you will produce dolomitic carbonatite melt, and here it will be some kind of silicate melt. Well, phase equilibria in this region are complicated. I'm not going to go into details, but that's basically kind of the first approach, the first step approach to that. So the message is that these dolomitic carbonatites that were found in Africa by Ken Bailey and others later probably originate from this region at about, I don't know, 30 kilobars, and somehow they got to the surface. They can actually react here with the silicate assemblage and transform themselves into more calcitic varieties. So that's the experimental sort of summary of how you can produce these primary carbonatitic melts from the mantle. And they should be dolomitic, and that's not a coincidence. A summary of the experimental information about silicate carbonate liquid immiscibility. Usually these compositions are plotted using very useful so-called Hamilton projection, where network forming oxides are grouped in one corner, a network modifiers divalent in another corner, and the alkalis, because of their special role, are in a separate corner. So there was a lot of debate whether there are compositions or not where this liquid field actually crosses alkali-free compositions, whether immiscibility can be produced without alkalis. It turns out that it's impossible, and the consensus now is that this field never goes to alkali-free compositions. So the most important elements on the diagram is the boundary, is the border of the two liquid field, where the compositions of immiscible liquids are plotted, and the stability field of calcite, of liquidus calcite or some other carbonates nearby, and sodium carbonate. So this is where calcite starts to crystallize as the first phase. And the relationships between this surface and that surface, they can be different, they can intersect or they cannot intersect, and there is also some important mineral compositions plotted here. So basically you can see, looking at this type of projection, that let's say if you have silicate melt with some carbonate here, and you crystallize lots of albite nepheline, then you may actually avoid the immiscibility field and go directly to residual calcite precipitating carbonatitic liquids. That's the third mechanism of formation, residual mechanism of carbonatite formation. But if you crystallize mafic minerals like diopside and enstatite in greater proportion, phosphorite, and that's the most likely scenario, you go up, you hit liquid immiscibility field, they produce immiscible carbonatites, and you have evolution of coexisting silicate liquid. Okay, and that's how it looks in 3D. It's just to show you that Hamilton projection is this surface, but you can actually separate some oxides, calcium from magnesium, and if you're kind of good in visualizing things in 3D, you can see how this miscibility gap and calcite crystallization surface intersect in 3D. Trace element partitioning is dear to my heart because I spent like 10 years studying that. So basically, as I said, there were mostly recent experiments by two groups, one in Germany and another one in Zurich. And I think these are the most reliable data on element partitioning between immiscible silicate and carbonate liquids. I will be using Nernst partition coefficient, which is a very simple thing. This is a concentration of some component in carbonate liquid divided by concentration of the same component in the silicate liquid, and all of them in weight percent. Very simple thing, just a ratio of concentrations. We were surprised at early stages to see kind of ANUMA type relationships between partition coefficients between two liquids and ionic properties of the cations, which is a formal charge 2 plus divided by ionic radius. This type of thing has been well known since John Bundy and Bernie Wood studies on partitioning of elements between crystalline phases and liquids. Strangely enough, similar relationships exist when you look at partitioning between two liquids. And looks like there is some pressure dependence because this is 1 kilobar and this is 10 kilobar, and the maximum kind of slightly shifts from barium to strontium and calcium. So it was kind of interesting to try to plot partition coefficients against ionic properties of different elements, and there is well, some systematics in different groups, but there is also quite messy relationships if you look at the whole plot. So these are different valencies. So basically the main message from this is that very few elements actually concentrate in immiscible carbonatite liquid. And that's a sodium carbonate dominated liquid. Calcitic liquids do not are completely miscible. So, well, they vary, these partition coefficients vary with the temperature and composition of the melt, but basically it's mostly barium, strontium, calcium, and sodium that are concentrating strongly in the silicate, in the carbonate liquid. If we look at rare earths, light rare earths sometimes with water they concentrate in the carbonate liquid. In dry compositions they are at about 1, so equal concentrations in both liquids. And heavy rare earths tend to be in the silicate melt. So carbonatitic liquids do not extract heavy rare earths. And compared to other salts, other molten immiscible salts that we studied with the centrifuge, basically carbonatites are very poor extractors of rare earths and high field strength elements compared to fluoride liquids or sulfide, chloride. Of course, natural carbonatites are mixtures of carbonates with fluorine and with sulfur, and that will change the situation. But this is poorly studied area. Intermediate mixtures are poorly studied. Well, here I don't have much time, just a comparison of experimental partition coefficients with what we see the distribution in nature in Aldonian and Guy, enrichment factors between natron carbonatite lavas and phenolitic, nephelinitic lavas. And there's a reasonably good match with some mismatch for molybdenum and tungsten, maybe also some other elements, but there's a reasonably good match as you would expect. What happens to sodium? What happens to alkalis? Why do we have so many calcium carbonatites? And looks like from experimental data, immiscible or residual carbonatites should contain significant amount of alkalis. Well, we tried to look into that, and we studied partitioning of sodium, magnesium, and calcium between aqueous fluid and carbonatitic liquid. it was a very old idea starting from Eckermann and his studies of finitization around carbonatitic and alkaline dikes. I think it was Alneo complex, but it was a long-standing idea that sodium is actually released during crystallization of calcium carbonatides into phenitizing fluids and produces all these reactions and alteration around that, and calcium magnesium basically forms calcite or calcite entanglement. And looks like experimentally you can show that partition coefficient of sodium is, let's say, at about 0.3. Well, it's like several times higher than partition coefficient of magnesium and calcium. And recently, published in this year,
the gigantic deposits of rare earths connected to carbonatite, not to other rocks.
No.
So what do you think? What is the reason? I agree that immiscibility doesn't work here, but what was the